Until the day she passed away, she's always healthy.
Yeah, no medications. I mean, April 4th, the facility declared an outbreak. April 11th, it took them to April 11th to test people. And then it came back April 12th that she was positive, but she had no symptoms. No cough, no respiratory problems, no nothing, right? And every day, like they would say, oh, your grandmother had a fever the day before we tested, but we just gave her a Tylenol and it was a slight fever and that was it. And then every day after that, she never had a fever. So they thought, she's okay, she's okay, she's okay. But all this time when they were saying, she was okay, I didn't know that their staffing levels were so decimated, right? After we pressed and pressed, there was a press release that said down to 20%. And at the beginning, when you read it, you think you read it wrong, right? Like after my plea on CBC on the 15th, and we didn't get any help, no SWAT team came then. So we went there and we looked at the stuff that was coming in, and we thanked all the healthcare workers that were there and really encouraged them, because you got to be so brave to go in that place at 20% staffing capacity and what your effort would have to be.
So the last time you talked to your grandma, that was the one?
The last time I talked to grandmother was on the 22nd, when the staff took it upon themselves to just call me on a video chat without any appointment or anything, because a PSW had thought that she wasn't doing well. So I had her on her phone. I had just come back from being at Mongshong and thanking staff and holding my sign that said, when is the SWAT team coming, right? And so we actually was able to kind of call my mother and my father. My mother's her daughter on the echo drop, so that we have an echo drop to kind of check on my parents since they're seniors and they insist on being by themselves. So, okay, so we have this. So we called on them. They were able to hear me and answer. So then we showed the two screens, and then my mom was able to see her mom and my dad was able to see my grandmother. And she did look a little bit disoriented and uncomfortable. Well, she was kind of agitated because they're trying to make her kind of like on the screen and everything, right, to catch her face, right? But the next day, like on the 23rd, she was better again. Like she was drinking and she was better. So then they're like, oh, grandma's better. So you have to remember, grandmother has recovered from so many things and so many falls. Like last year she fell every month, but she was like a rubber ball. She'd fall down and not break a nail. She was legendary. Like, exactly. She was absolutely legendary in that place. The doctors were amazed. The PSDs were amazed. The PSWs were amazed. And, at one point, the PSWs and the nurses were, because she's educated and she could read, they were starting to write poems and asking her to read them, checking her vocab, right? And checking her understanding, right? And she would read them, and then they're like, oh, she can do poetry. Then they're like, okay, let's see if she can do math. So then they were giving her math equations, like, 2 + 2 is 4, 2 + 3 is, whatever, right? And she was like reading them and she knew them. So then they thought, what else can we test grandmother on? She's so legendary. So then they started saying, I know where I'll get her. So then they wrote out A, B, C, D, like in English. So then grandmother would read A, B, C, D. And then I'm like, yeah, sure, okay. But then she'll turn to them and say E, F, G, H, she would recite the alphabet, right? I'm like, hey, you're missing a couple of letters in here, like kind of thing. So, she was so quick. She was so smart, and she was, rock star.
Rock star, yeah. And then how was the funeral?
The funeral, there's a restriction on funerals, right? So not only did the families were forbidden to go see their seniors while they were ill in the nursing home, right? Because of the lockdown. So the funeral, you're only allowed 10, and you have to be distanced from yourselves and from the funeral staff and from the cemetery staff at the grave site. So it's like 6 feet apart. You cannot get near the coffin. So you have to stay 6 feet away. Because it's an outbreak home, and even non-outbreak homes, I think they're requiring this now, but you would have to double check that. You can't bring anything from the home. So grandmother did not have her favorite hat. Her favorite hats, they used to kid her about, right? Are these knit hats that have Michael Kors on it, MK. And the staff would say, huh, Michael Kors, huh? And walk away from grandmother, right? Because they're like, this 100-year-old lady's rocking Michael Kors hats, right? Like that, right? Or Listenza, lingerie or whatever, right? But so she couldn't have her favorite hat. She couldn't have her denture. She couldn't have her hearing aid. She couldn't have anything that was in her room, which is considered her home. I know as a Christian, we don't need any of that stuff anymore, but would have been nice to put her dentures in her mouth. So that was kind of sad. And then you're only allowed 10 people, and they really don't want you to go to the max of 10 people. They want you as small as possible and as quick as possible. So I always imagined I would have a huge homegoing for grandmother, a huge send-off with her old neighbors from eons ago, and, her community activists that she knew, like Amy and Avi and Alan and all her relatives, and, show the decades of photos. And she has 6 grandkids, and I think she has 9 great-grandkids.
Like the beginning with she separated with your grandpa for 30 years. That was the first time she joined her husband in Canada.
Yeah, can you imagine getting married at 18, seeing him like 7 years later, having 3 kids, and then never seeing that person until you're 50 years old? They're braver than us. I mean, if we didn't see somebody for 30-something years, yeah, she's 50. So she came on her own. So this little 50-year-old lady that spoke no English whatsoever had to get to Hong Kong, I guess, and then go from Hong Kong or wherever they went from to get to Toronto. I don't know if they had direct flights or whether they had to stop like somewhere else, like in Vancouver or somewhere, and then come or whatever. But she made the journey. She got off that plane and she faced someone that she hadn't seen in a long, long time.
Oh my goodness. Whew.
But he had a coat for her, and he had boots for her because it was winter. Wow. And I'm sure they fit her, right? So that's just amazing that, he can kind of gauge that after such a distance, like it's a romance story. It's a sad story. It's so many things, it's perseverance. It's a whole bunch of stuff, faith, everything, And I asked her, why did you come on your own? She goes, well, you just can't leave like that with your whole family. You have to kind of go one by one. So I was the last to leave. And she left an elderly mother.
Did she ever mention how was the life back in China for those 30 years?
I learned a lot. Like apparently you're supposed to have zhongtai at the door just in case the Japanese bombed, and you have to run into the hills to hide. The zhongtai would be the zhongtai in the water. The zhongtai is this leaf wrapped in like, and it's got rice and it's got salted meat in it, and it's boiled for a long, long time, and so it's already cooked. So they used to keep that at the door, and some water, and I think she said some matches or something, and they would run into the hills with the kids and just hide there until the planes left, right? But she said, there was, dead bodies on the road, people that starved to death, families, all sorts of things. But the good thing about her was she was smart enough to go against her husband's wishes. Maybe she'll never see him again. So I guess I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to buy that piece of land because I think that piece of land is something that I can use. So then she used to tell me, like if I didn't eat all my rice or whatever, I'm grain free now, so I don't eat rice, but she doesn't know that. But she said, do you know how much energy was it to get that grain of rice? There's a lot of work to this, Helen. You better eat that.
After 49, did she or her family, your parents, had some difficulties during the communist time?
Yeah. She saw a lot of people being hauled off and killed in public. They took all the land, and there was people that were executed. There were people that committed suicide. There was all sorts of stuff, horrific stuff that she saw. Yeah, and it wasn't like she planned to do any of that stuff, right? But she'd read in the newspaper something, and she'd say, "That's totally wrong. That's racism, or that's injustice, or that's not fair, right? Like that's just not right." And I remember, she'd say, "Helen, don't you think should be something done about that?" And I was like, kid, I'm like, "Yeah, Grandma, yeah." And I'm like, I just want to go out and have a good time.
But your grandma insisted that's not.
But she's like, no, you need to do something. If everybody just kind of stepped back, what would be done? Everybody would be an observer, right? Kind of thing, right? Well, you have to remember that back in that time, right, with the seniors of that time, they really thought it was a shameful period that they would rather forget in many ways because it was so shameful, right? I remember my grandfather saying, with the head tax certificate, it was such an important piece of document. If he did not have that in his pocket, they would throw him in jail, right? He had to carry that every single day he was in Canada, and worry that it wasn't stolen from him, people steal his pants, steal his shirt, he was, that was very valuable piece because that was his right to be in Canada, and if he lost that head tax certificate, they would throw him in jail and that would be the end of him, right? So for grandmother, she wasn't ashamed to put her face to it. And I think that was her key contribution is if there's, she wasn't, I remember going to, I think it was a film that Malcolm Guy did. It's called Moving the Mountain. And it was at the film festival in the early 80s. And she was there at the opening because she said, yeah, I want to talk about this, but she was it was just me and her there with Malcolm. We actually have a picture of that somewhere. But she wasn't afraid to say it and have her, and to say it in public. Mm-hmm. She wasn't afraid to call it. She wasn't afraid to put her face to it. And she wasn't afraid to put her effort into it, even though it dredged up a lot of bad memories and terrible things, because it's only in the awareness building that really you get change, right?
Yeah. So eventually, Canadian government apologized. That's Stephen Harper's.
Yeah. So she was in Ottawa twice. once when they did a rally, we had a rally, and all the seniors that wanted to participate actually came up to Ottawa to say, you know, it's taking so long. When is it going to happen? And then the second time she was in Ottawa was to hear the parliamentary apology. You know, it's she was excited, but none of us knew what the deal would be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we didn't know, like, CCNC had a number of demands, and we didn't know what demands were accepted and what weren't, and so we were just very excited and hopeful. I think hopeful. Mm-hmm. She was excited and hopeful. But I have to admit, she does want her cash, because she thought that was the money was a large amount back then. And, you know, the Chinese people not only helped build the railroad. If it wasn't for the Chinese workers, the railroad wouldn't have been built, and the most dangerous parts of it wouldn't have been done. It wouldn't have been done, completed on time. And the money that they collected from the head tax actually paid for the entire exercise of building the railroad. So, you know, the Chinese did contribute a lot, but they got no recognition for it. At the last spike, there was no Chinese people there. In the history books, there's no talk about that or nothing. So she wanted her money, but she also wanted the recognition of the Chinese community in the building of Canada.
You and your grandma very close to each other. And then when you think about her life, what's in your mind? How you feel? How you want to tell people about your grandma? What you would say?
I think I would say, I was thinking, we did a lot of selfies, grandmother and I. She loved technology, you know, like for, you know, 107, 108, 110. She liked Apple products. She liked technology. She kind of, you know, thought it was cool, FaceTime and all of that, seeing people and all of those things, and taking selfies was a pretty cool thing to do. So I would miss taking selfies with her. And it makes me feel like our seniors deserve better than this, and grandmother lived a full life, and she battled right till the end, and she was a fighter. But the battle does not stop at grandmother's death. It's actually the beginning of this, and I want that message to resound in the community and in all parts of government and all levels of government and all political parties. Just like the head tax did, the campaign, and hopefully we will not take 23 years to address it properly. And she was way more kind-hearted, and her spirit was a lot more gentler. Although she was a fighter, she was very, very kind to everyone. And I think that kind of plays on my mind too.
Thank you, Helen, for accepting my interview and then telling us the story about your grandma.
You're welcome. Thanks for the time. I didn't mean to get so emotional, but I think they do a lot, and they're getting so little, and it's been decades of neglect, and we're just too busy with our careers, and you know, and I think with this pandemic, there's been a total refocus, and I don't know if the refocus will change as soon as everybody gets let out of their cages, but hopefully not. I hope that this will make us really better.
Thank you.
Thank you.